Good afternoon, and welcome back to our Arts and Entertainment Lecture Series. We're delighted to have you join us once more for another captivating session with our esteemed American composer, Samuel Adler. For those who joined us in January and March, you'll recall Sam's compelling narrative of his early years in Mannheim, his daring escape from the Nazis during Kristallnacht, and his journey as a budding musician in America. From his formative years at Boston University to his studies at Harvard and Tanglewood, under the tutelage of prominent composers like Walter Piston, Randall Thompson, Irving Fine, Paul Hindemith, and Aaron Copland, Sam's experiences have shaped his extraordinary musical legacy. If you missed the first two talks, they are now available on the Arts Empowering Life website for your viewing pleasure, and that's artsempoweringlife.org. What began as a single program has evolved into a series, and today marks the third installment of our enlightening discussions. In this session, we will delve into Sam's experiences at two of the nation's most esteemed musical institutions, the Eastman School of Music and the Juilliard School. For those new to our series, it's worth noting that Sam celebrated his 96th birthday last month, and we eagerly anticipate many, many more years of shared inspiration. A true luminary in the realm of music, Sam Adler stands as one of the preeminent composers and conductors of our era, with an adventurous spirit that has yielded over 400 published works. He has imparted his wisdom to so many of us for over 6 decades. His recent album, To Speak to Our Time, performed by the acclaimed Gloria Dei Cantores and conducted by Richard Pugsley, earned the American Prize, adding yet another accolade to his distinguished career, which includes ASCAP's esteemed Aaron Copland Lifetime Achievement Award. However, beyond his musical prowess, Sam is a masterful storyteller. Whether through his compositions or in conversation, his ability to captivate audiences knows no bounds. Moreover, Sam serves as a bridge builder, fostering connections among individuals of diverse backgrounds, ages, and musical preferences. His upcoming book, Building Bridges with Music, Stories from a Composer's Life, soon, I promise, Sam, to be reintroduced by Paraclete Press, is a testament to his remarkable talent for uniting hearts and minds through the power of music. And we will have order information after today's discussion. But without further ado, let's continue our journey where we left off. Sam, welcome back. So great to have you again.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Paul. I'm delighted to be back, and welcome to everybody that's listening or watching. I started the last lecture with the December Christmas activities while I was in the Army, yes. 1951. Today, I'm going to start with Christmas 1965, because there was another changing day. The day after Christmas, 26th of December 1965, I received 9 calls. I was working on a solo cello sonata for my former student and friend who unfortunately has passed away. And he wanted it right away. And I had to finish it. And we had a little garden house. I said to my wife, whose name was Carol at the time, that I cannot be disturbed. Well, the maid came out, and I said, look, I have to finish this. Lynn Harrell is waiting for it, and I need to finish. She said, look, you have a call from the Dean of Music at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I said, I don't care if anybody calls, I can't answer. Well, she came out 8 more times. I said, what can I do? I can't answer. Tell everybody that calls, I will call them back. Well, all of a sudden, my wife comes out and says, look, you've got to answer this phone call. It's the 9th call, and it's from Walter Handel at the Eastman School. I went in, and he said, Sam, how much money do you make? You have 3 jobs. How much money do you make? I said, I make $15,000, which was at that time enough money for a living. Well, he said, I'll pay you 16 because Bernard Rogers, who was at that time the distinguished major composer at the Eastman School, Bernard Rogers picked you out of 10 composers that he wanted to be his successor. And I can't say no to him. You have to come. And he hung up. Well, what could I do? After all, I of course, this was a great thing, but I never thought of leaving Dallas. You know, this had been home for 14 years.
There's a big difference in temperature, too, between Dallas, Texas, and Rochester, New York.
And how I need snowshoes.
Yes.
At any rate, I certainly accepted after considering it and talking to a lot of people, said, well, you can't say no, and it's great. And I had a lot of colleagues at North Texas who were graduates from the Eastman School and said, oh, it's the top. You just don't want to, it's like heaven. Well, of course, that's great. Okay, well, I did accept. But there was something that happened beforehand because my wife at that time was quite pregnant and we were expecting another child. We had a daughter who was by then 5 years old, and she was expecting the following July. Well, it's very interesting. European families like mine had a whistle. We had a whistle for the family, and my father and I had a special whistle. Our whistle was the theme from the Hebrides Overture. La, 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 that. And when Debbie, the firstborn, was born, we set out at 1:00 in the morning and put on the classical music station in Dallas. And what do you think? They played the Hebrides Overture. Well, what happened was that the doctor said to Carol, look, we have to induce her. You're overdue, but nothing is going to happen. So I want to go fishing on July 4th, and on July 5th at 6:00, you come to the hospital and we'll induce her. We'll induce the baby. In those days, we didn't know the sex. Well, we went out, put on the classical music station, and what do you think? They played the Hebrides. So when I heard la, 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 I knew it was going to be a girl because, and it was. Naomi was born on the 5th of July, and we went to Rochester about a month later. She was so little that we carried her in a basket, or Carol did. I drove up in the car. Yeah. But before leaving Dallas, there were a lot of wonderful celebrations, all kinds of concerts, especially the Dallas Symphony ended its season with the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven, which is a sort of unknown work, but they played it just the same. And they always did a short work before. And in honor of my leaving, they did my cantata called The Vision of Isaiah. Yeah. And it was just terrific to leave on that high note. Well, we went to Rochester. We had actually built a house on a street. We were the first house to be built. Very nice outside of Rochester in Pittsford. And Pittsford is, as you know, since you went to Eastman, is a very nice suburb of the city. Well, Carol actually was from Rochester originally. Um, and we got there a month before the school started. And I got acquainted with some people. There were 5 members of the composition faculty. I was to be the 5th. Bernard Rogers was there. There was a young composer, Joseph Palermo, and some others who taught other courses in the theory department.
And Sam, Howard Hanson was still a larger-than-life presence there, wasn't he?
He was, but he wasn't teaching.
He wasn't teaching.
Walter Handel was the head of it, and something happened during the summer which was most interesting, and it was that the very famous and wonderful American composer Norman Della Gioia persuaded the Ford Foundation to give him $1 million to start the Contemporary Music Project, which placed composers into high schools, large high schools all over the country, to write music for the high school band, the high school chorus, the high school orchestra. And it was a fantastically successful thing. Now, there were universities in each of the sections, like the Eastern Seaboard, the middle section, and so on, that had people in charge to oversee the program. And Walter Handel asked Della Gioia who he wants to have from the Eastman School, because he asked the Eastman School to be the person to be directing the whole program for the Eastern Seaboard. And he says, well, Sam Adler is coming up here. Would you like him? And he says, oh, yes, fine. Well, so I had an extra gig. And it was really something. The overall director to do the everyday work under Norman Della Gioia was Grant Beglarian. And I knew a little of Grant Beglarian because he had been a member of the 7th Army Symphony Orchestra.
Small world.
Not while I was there, but of course we knew each other through it. So it was a wonderful kind of reunion. Besides that, I had a very busy schedule. And it started on the 1st of September. School always in those days started at that time. And I went to school on the first day, and my schedule was very heavy. I had 12 private students, and I had to teach 18th century counterpoint and orchestration. That's a pretty heavy schedule. However, it was doable and enjoyable because that's what I'm there for. I went there the first day, and I had all of my 12 students for a 3-hour class. I want to tell you something. It was the most enervating experience. These kids were fantastic. I had been teaching at University of North Texas, and we had very good students. But these students, it reminded me of my being at Harvard and being low man on the totem pole, because all the other guys knew much more than I and were really educated in music. Well, I came home and I said to Carol, I think I'm in the wrong place. These guys are, I really have to study now. I have to learn something. I have to really teach. And it was the same thing with the classes. It was just wonderful. And that's how it started out. furthermore, Walter Handel, of course, knew I was a conductor. So he said, well, Sam, why don't you, on the first concert of the Philharmonia, conduct the whole concert? So we did Brahms 1, and he wanted me to do a work of mine. So I did Requiescat in Pace, which I had written for the Dallas Symphony some years ago when JFK was assassinated in Dallas.
Wow.
So that's how the whole thing started.
You know, Sam, can I just interject? This is amazing to me as, of course, a student who, and 1966 was 58 years ago. Yet last year, when Eastman was celebrating 100 years, who were they commissioning their Philharmonia and their wind ensemble to do pieces? But your works have been played at the Eastman Theater, Kilbourne Hall, all those great places for 58 years. It's amazing. Right. And I'm sure they'll still do some in the next year.
Well, from your mouth to God's ear.
There you go.
I hope they do. Well, I want to tell you, the next year, they scheduled my first opera, The Outcasts of Poker Flat. And it was a double bill with Joe Palermo's opera. I have forgotten the name of his opera. It was very good, his opera. And they did a wonderful job on The Outcasts of Poker Flat. As a matter of fact, I still have a recording of it. And this was, for me, a new life. The CMP, the Contemporary Music Project, was also a new life because I was in touch with the music schools on the entire Eastern Seaboard. And what happened was we tried to encourage each college, each music school to have the theory program upgraded, meaning new ideas to come in rather than teaching theory exactly the way it was. We used to call it the Green Bible because McHose was the way to teach theory. And that was, of course, the Eastman way of teaching theory. And it had been by that time even a little old, you know. Though the book on orchestration by Bernard Rogers is a wonderful book, which no one knows, I'm sorry to say. But I can't be too sorry because I'm happy to say they know mine now.
Oh, I think your book is known. You know, it's very funny. One of my friends went and studied in Lithuania. And then someone says, well, do you have the orchestration book of Sam Adler? And he says, yeah, I think I do have that. So it's all over the world, Sam.
Well, now it's in Russian, so it would be easier for the Lithuanians.
There you go.
At any rate, it was a great first year at Eastman and a wonderful experience in Rochester, though we were not used to snow. And that winter, we had snow that was above our garage. It was just unbelievable. Well, a couple of things happened, though, that were important to mention. And that is Walter Handel really was a fantastic musician, wonderful conductor, known all over the world. But running a school is a different story. So things were rocky there with the faculty. The head of composition was Howard Barlow. And Howard Barlow was a typical Eastman product. Very well schooled, excellent musician, great organist. And the Eastman faculty had produced some pieces for one woodwind and string orchestra, all of which were recorded by the Philadelphia Orchestra, including Howard Barlow's In Winters Past. which is for bassoon and strings. And he was famous for that. But that was it. So when Bernard Rogers retired and I went to Eastman, Joe Palermo, after 2 years, left. Walter Handel received a call from Leonard Bernstein. And Bernstein said, look, there's a composer, the greatest composer in America. You've got to take him instead of Palermo because he's a Rochesterian. He lives there. It was David Diamond. Well, of course, what can you do? But he said, no, I really can't. Wayne Barlow, being the head of composition, and David Diamond were at Eastman together as freshmen. And in the sophomore year, David Diamond was kicked out because he couldn't behave. Well, Handel was in a pickle. So he called me and he said, what should I do? I mean, and Bernstein insisted, called every week for 5 weeks. Every week he called. Well, finally, Handel said, Sam, I mean, we got to do something. So I said, well, I'm not the chair. Talk to Wayne Barlow. Well, Wayne said, if he comes, I go. Well, I said, why don't we just ask him to give some lectures? Well, I said, okay. So he called Diamond and said, would you give 2 lectures? One to the students and the other to the community. Now, David Diamond was a brilliant guy, but a very difficult person. He wrote some really good music, but difficult as a person. And as a teacher, impossible. At any rate.
But Leonard Bernstein wanted him to come to Eastman.
Well, because, there were many things that they had in common. And so he called, and Diamond said, oh, yes, I'll do the lectures. Fine. First lecture was to the students. And you don't know this anymore because it's changed, but there was a huge room where all the students could meet on the ground floor. 101, it was called.
Yeah.
So that all the students came, of course, famous composer is giving a lecture. So David Diamond came, and we as a composition faculty, and by that time we had another member, and that was Warren Benson. Warren Benson came on 2 years after I was there. And Warren was a terrific colleague and a wonderful, wonderful teacher and composer. We all sat in the first row. Wayne Barlow, everybody. Wayne Barlow said, you introduce him, Sam. You're second in line. I don't do anything with him. So I, of course, was happy to introduce him. But I was just going to introduce him when he said, turned to Wayne Barlow and said, God damn it. I go to every school that I at least have a glass of water. Go out and get me a glass of water. Wayne Barlow stood up, walked out, and while he was walking out, he said, you know that guy, he's the head of the department here. He's written one piece that even anybody knows. The rest of it is all junk. And he was talking about the bassoon and string orchestra piece. But the students were, of course, this was great. I mean, people,
controversial. That still happens.
So,
Students like controversy.
So he comes back and gives him a glass of water. the talk was all taking people on the faculty and just putting them down to nothing. That was the talk. He said, I don't know why you're at this school, because you are not going to learn anything, because these people don't know anything, etc. And so he took everybody one by one, especially the piano faculty and the voice faculty and so on. Well, of course, the students loved it. They were cheering, you know. Okay. The next night, there was a lecture for the city. The play, it was in the small hall, which is so beautiful, Kilburn Hall, and it was packed. And Walter Handel introduced him very nicely. One of the great composers in America today, native of Rochester. We were very proud of him, so on and so forth. He's going to talk about Beethoven. That's what he wanted to talk about. First thing he said was, you know why Beethoven was such a great composer? Because he was a homosexual. Well, that even in those days did not go over so well. Yeah. And everybody was shocked. And it went downhill from then on. He went on and on about Eastman School is really not doing anything to promote music in this country. It's only promoting itself and so on. Imagine, I mean, he's giving a talk on Beethoven and he's trashing the school. The next day, Bernstein called. He said, well, you going to hire him? Handel said, not on your life. He had told him about what had happened. And Bernstein understood and didn't bother him anymore. But David Diamond was very upset, of course. And he called me and he said, weren't my lectures wonderful? And so on and so forth. I said, you really gave yourself the death knell right away. How can you imagine it? What did I say? I didn't say anything that wasn't true. And what was really important was I had them record the two. I said, would you like to hear what you said? And he said no, because he knew. And this was my first experience with this kind of thing. Yeah. Well, the next year, Wayne Barlow retired, and Walter Handel asked me to be the chair of the composition department. This was 1970. Wayne had been a very good chair and was a lovely man, but he wanted to retire. He was old enough to retire. I think he was 70 at the time. And he stayed in Rochester, but retired. That year also, I think, Bernard Rogers passed away. And so two of the people who had built the department were no longer. At any rate, that year also, Wayne was still the chair. We had the first confrontation while that was when I was there with Howard Hanson, who had been for 40 years the head of the Eastman School. Well, Howard had been very nice to me superficially. You know, we didn't have much to do with each other, but he was still a force behind everything going on in Eastman, in Rochester, and in the music, educational music world, because he had put in place the deans of all the major music schools, Michigan, USC, Texas, everywhere that had a big music school. He had the influence. Not in New York, I mean, Juilliard and so on, and not in New England, but every other place. And he had an influence at Eastman because he gave two $100 awards, which at that time was pretty good. $100 for the best piece for orchestra and $100 for the best piece for wind ensemble. Well, that was really good. And the composition faculty uh, had a new member that year, Joseph Schwantner. And Joe Schwantner was the up and coming young composer of the time. He came from the University of the Pacific and actually was born in Chicago, got a doctorate at the University of Chicago, but his first job was at the University of the Pacific, and he just hated it there because it was such a backward place. And we hired him. He was already quite famous at the time, and I think he was in his late 20s, 28 or 29. A wonderful composer, and I'm happy to say he's still alive, writing wonderful music.
Oh, we did some Schwantner pieces with the wind ensemble when I
Oh
was
there. Yes,
just,
oh
yeah.
yes. I think the best piece for wind ensemble is his that first piece he wrote for wind ensemble. And anyway, Joe was the young member, and so Wayne Barlow was still there, but he was going to retire, and we picked a piece for electronic tape and orchestra.
Probably not Howard Hanson's favorite cup of tea there.
Howard Hanson called Wayne Barlow and said, "Wayne, what are you picking? This stuff, this crap? I don't give the $100." So Warren Benson, who was always really on top of things, said to Wayne Barlow, "Look, he doesn't give the $100. We don't give the prize. That's it. I mean, we pick the person and the piece, and if he doesn't like it, that's too bad. We're going to give the prize just the same." Well, Wayne Barlow was really, he was a student of Howard Hanson's, so he was very nervous about it. He says, "Well, I can't, I can't say anything to him." Well, it was a real confrontation. So we had a meeting. Joe Schwantner said, "Maybe we should take him to lunch and talk to him about this." So Wayne said, "I don't know. I would be afraid to talk to him." He said, "Well," Joe said, "Well, Sam, you talk to him. You're number 2 in the department." I said, "Well, if you want me to." So Wayne Barlow called him, said, "We'll take you to lunch. We'll go to the Rochester Club," which was across the street. It's now the Broadway Inn, or the Inn on Broadway.
Right, right.
Anyway, we went there, and it was a gall for us to do that because the only member was Howard Hanson. He would have to pay for lunch, but that's okay. He was rich enough. So we all went on Monday. I had the worst weekend thinking, what am I going to say? Well, we got there, all of us, Howard Hanson, Wayne Barlow, Warren Benson, Joe Schwantner, and myself. All after several minutes of quiet, Hanson said, "Well, you don't just take me to lunch. There's something coming up." So I said, "Howard, look, I'd been thinking about it all Sunday, Saturday, and so on." I said, since 1928, you had the American Music Festival, and you did everything, whether you liked it or not, whether you liked the composer or not. For instance, you did Roy Harris's symphonies, and you didn't like him. You did the latest pieces of Copland, and you didn't like him. And I mean, what should happen now? You don't do new pieces anymore because you don't like the medium. Quiet. He stroked his beard, said, "Very clever, Sam. What am I going to say?" I said, "Should we stop now doing everything that's new?" Very clever, he said. "Okay, you conduct the crappy piece and I'll give $100. And he never interfered again. It was really a wonderful moment. And I'll never forget it. I give him a lot of credit because he really hated music with electronic tape, you know.
But that really was the thing in the 70s.
It always
was just
as a matter of fact, Wayne Barlow was the person that taught electronic music.
Yeah.
It was the composers who were very much to the right that went in because there was no other place to go. Yeah. They were writing very neo-romantic music, and that was not being done anymore. So they went into electronic music. And by the way, when Wayne retired the next year, we hired somebody to take over the studio, and we got a terrific grant to have new equipment. And we were so close to the Moog guy in Ithaca, and he gave us wonderful equipment, and we had one of the best studios. Hewlett Packard gave us the studio. They paid for it. And Schindler was the man who took over the studio, and he was a wonderful teacher. And we had everybody took electronic music, including myself. I wrote the worst piece I ever wrote with electronic music.
Well, but anyway,
it wasn't my thing, but it was important. Yeah. And Schindler was a terrific teacher, and we had a wonderful studio.
Now I have to ask. I have to ask you just a couple questions before we leave Eastman, because
Oh, we're not leaving yet.
I know, but I want to give you enough time to get to Juilliard too.
Oh, yeah.
I want to make sure that everybody, here's the two things, then I will get out of your way. I want to make sure that everybody knows how you got tenure there, because I think that's a terrific story. And I want to hear your visits with Aaron Copland there, because it's completely different, of course, than the electronic composition. So I definitely want to make sure people hear those two stories.
Well, of course, for anybody in the college series, you don't get tenure until 6 years or so. In some places, you never get it. When I visited Handel before going to Eastman, he really didn't know anything about hiring somebody new for tenure or any other benefit. So I went up there in January of 1966. I had conducted a concert of my father's music at Temple Emmanuel in New York, and went up to Rochester after that. It was 10 years after my father had passed away, and they were honoring his memory with his music there. And I went up, and I went into his office, Handel's office, and he looked at this. "We have to fill out this form," he said. "Do you want to be an associate or a full professor?" I said, "Do I have a choice?" He said, "Of course." So he put full professor. "Do you want tenure? Do you need tenure?" And said, "Of course." He said, "With tenure." There.
I love that.
In one swoop, I was full professor and had tenure.
That's the best story ever. I love that.
Yeah. Well, back to a little later in my adventures in Rochester. I felt that I wanted to do something there. And it was that when Howard Hanson was the head of it, they had no visiting composers. And when I became head of the composition department, we procured money to get 2 composers to be in residence, for one for the first semester for a week and one for the second semester for a week. And of course, the first one I called was Aaron Copland. And I have to tell a really interesting story about that, because you see, in 1928, Howard Hanson started the American Music Festival, and for many years did, as I said before, everything by every possible composer, especially Aaron Copland. He did pieces that he wrote in Paris and all those pieces that were not done very much in those days. Well, in 1929, Aaron Copland wrote an article about music festivals of American music all over America. And of course, he wrote about the Hanson Festival in Rochester. He said, the most important festival is in Rochester. However, it is pretty conservative, because Howard Hanson does the things that he likes only. And that wasn't true. The next week, Howard Hanson wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying, I am sorry that my friend, Aaron Copland, wrote that article, because everybody knows it's not true what he said. But then you can never please the New York Jewish homosexual establishment. Well, in 1929, that was not to be said, and certainly not in the New York Times. Well, from that day on, they didn't speak, didn't communicate. However, in 1975, Copland was 75 years old. Everybody was giving him an honorary degree. I went to Handel. I said, Walter, excuse me. At that time, Bob Freeman was the head of the school. And that's another story, which I will tell if I have time. I went to Bob Freeman, and who was all in my corner and loved Aaron Copland. I said, we cannot be the only big music school not to give Aaron Copland a degree. Well, he said, you call him and we will give him a degree whenever he can come up, we'll give him the degree. Well, I called Copland and he gave me a date. And I said to Bob Freeman, look, it would really be great if we could get Howard Hanson to hand the degree over to Copland. Yeah. He said, well, you call him and you talk to him. And I called him and I said, look, it's about time you bury the hatchet. And, there was a moment of silence, but then he said, thank you for calling me. I will definitely do it.
Oh, that's great.
About a week later, I got a long letter from Hanson explaining why he can't do it. And it was a very legitimate one. And it was that same day, the governor of Nebraska, where he was born, Howard Hanson was born, made it Howard Hanson Day, and the University of Nebraska was giving a degree, an honorary degree to him, and it was a celebration. The whole state celebrated their native son. He said, I'm sorry, I just can't do it, but enclosed in an enclosed envelope was a letter for Aaron Copland. Well, he said, please give this to Aaron before you give him the degree. Well, the day came, Aaron Copland came up, and while we were robing up for the ceremony, I gave him the letter. He read it before we went on stage, and actually tears flowed down his cheeks. It was the most beautiful letter. It's about time we get over this whole thing of 1929. We are the old guys in American music, and we've got to admit that we are the ones that are important, and so on and so forth. Beautiful, beautiful letter. He said, I can't go on stage without not writing a letter. He wrote a letter, handwritten letter to Hansen, saying how much he appreciated this and that it's about time every day. And after that, they really saw each other a couple of times even.
I was just looking up, sort of trying to figure. So Hansen would have been 79 in 1975 because he was 4 years older than Copland.
Right, and Copland was 75, was born in 1900.
1900, yeah.
So
and Hansen lived another 6 years. He lived another 6 years.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And Copland lived till he was 90.
90, yeah.
There were many other stories with Aaron Copland, but we have to keep going. Otherwise, we'll never get to Juilliard.
Because you have Juilliard and I want to hear about Milton Babbitt and that relationship, because that I know is moving.
But still, there's one story I want to tell about getting a new head of the Eastman School, and that is when in 1972 was the 50th anniversary of the Eastman School, 1922 to 1972. Walter Handel and the school commissioned 25 composers to write pieces in celebration of it, including a Polish composer by the name of Krzysztof Penderecki. Well, Penderecki came up. He wrote a piece, a wonderful piece, for harpsichord and chamber orchestra. And Handel conducted it. But Handel had a problem, and that was drinking. And Penderecki did not speak English, but he spoke German. So I became his interpreter. And he, after 2 rehearsals, said, Sam, this man I can't work with because he's always blue. That's an expression in German, as immer blau. He's always blue. He's not always drunk. Well, it was a shame. Well, especially he was drunk when it was a difficult thing for him to conduct. I mean, he was a great conductor, but it was a very difficult kind of a piece with places where there was an improvisation and things like that. Well, the students rebelled and said, we're not going to New York with the band we're doing Mahler 1 and this piece, and our conductor is drunk. I mean, and the student president went to the head of the university, because Eastman is part of the University of Rochester, and he went to him and said, look, we can. But he was very careful and didn't want to say yes or no. I know he's always drunk. Well, at any rate, we had 2 administrators at the top, and the top administrator went to New York with them to keep Handel from drinking. And the concert was a tremendous success at Carnegie Hall. But right afterwards, and he was not drunk, but right afterwards, he consumed a whole bottle of whiskey. This was the end of Walter Handel. He came back, and the head of University of Rochester's name was Wallace, and Wallace dismissed him. Well, of course, he blamed me because Wallace also made me the head of the search committee. Unfortunately, that was so. So Handel blamed me, but every time the faculty members or the students went to see him to try to not have him be drunk, he was drunk. So he left. So we were trying to find somebody. It's very difficult. I, being the head of the search committee, it was murder to try to find somebody. But we did. And it was Grant Beglarian, who was at that time the head of the music school at the University of Southern California. And Grant, of course, I knew from the CMP. And he accepted. Well, we were all very happy with him. Everybody knew him. He was an excellent composer and a very good administrator. Grant had made a real hit with both the people at the university and everybody at Eastman. 2 days after he was appointed, he reneged. Why? Because he had said to the people at the University of Southern California that if they give him such and such and such and such, he would not take the job. And they did not give it to him. So he accepted. Well, after he got back, they said, we'll give you this and that and that. So he had to say no. Well, you can imagine. However, our people went to him in California the same day and said, look, couldn't you reconsider? You already accepted it. He said, look, I'm bound by it. So we had to look again. And we looked at 3 people. The third one, we just had a letter. One was a musicologist, the other was a graduate of the school, a composer. And we had a letter from a younger person, musicologist also, who was at that time teaching at MIT. His name was Robert Freeman, who wrote a wonderful letter that he grew up in Rochester. His father was principal bass of the Rochester Philharmonic. He took lessons from the oboe teacher at the university, at Eastman, and so on and so forth. And then they moved to Boston because his father became principal of the Boston Symphony. He went to Harvard and so on and so forth, got a doctorate there. And he loves Eastman and so on and so forth. Well, I thought this is perfect, you know. So he came. We all liked him, though people had their doubts. He's too young, and so on and so forth. Does he know how to administer? Well, the university liked him because he was enrolled in a business course at Harvard, so that he could work on the budget business, which was always a problem at Eastman. So after real deliberations, he was hired. And everything that went wrong was my fault because I was head of the committee. Well, it was a chore, because they blamed me for everything.
But Bob Freeman ended up being there for quite a long time, wasn't he, Sam?
Oh yes, oh
Yeah,
yes. He was there for 30 years,
yeah,
and he was excellent.
yeah.
Um, and Bob came, and he also, I'll just end with that, the Eastman story with that. Bob um, loved to show that he was a musician, not the head of a school and an administrator. He was a very good pianist and a very good oboist. And he thought he was a very good conductor too, which he wasn't. But anyway, he insisted on conducting concerts with the Philharmonia and Esso. Well, everybody said, look, we have a conductor, and he's a very good conductor. We don't need this. Just administer the school. Well, it came to a head when, Schneider every year has a string festival in New York where he has students from all over, excellent students, have a string orchestra. Alexander Schneider was the head of it. And one year, because he knew Bob Freeman, he came to Eastman. And what do you think? Bob had to play a concerto with the orchestra. That was the last straw. I said, listen, we have a piano faculty. We have students who are pianists who should be doing this. You shouldn't be doing it. Well, it was a rebellion. Actually, half of the faculty voted to dismiss him. Well, whose fault was it that he was there? Me.
Of course,
Yeah,
yours.
my fault. So you tell Bob not to do this anymore. If he doesn't, if he's going to continue, we're going to toss him. Well, what are you going to say to your boss? You can't play the piano anymore? What is it? Well, I thought about it, and he did something that was really wonderful, and that was at the beginning of that year, he introduced the 3 new members of the faculty by accompanying them. One of them was Tzvi Zeitlin, and one of them was EYZ, the famous Chinese baritone. So I said to him, Bob, don't play anymore except for that thing. That's a wonderful way of showing what a great musician you are, and also introducing new faculty by your playing for them. That satisfied him. And he had a great tenure at Eastman.
Oh, from my experience there, history looks very fondly on Bob Freeman.
Oh yes, I think I know there was one that they like better now, but Bob was a terrific head of it. Yeah. I always wanted to retire at 65. And 1964 came, and I wanted to retire. But they already hired, this time a woman, Augusta Reed Thomas, to take my place. And I thought that was a very good hire. But she got a fellowship at Harvard or Radcliffe at that time to be in residence for the year. And so she called me and said, Sam, would you mind staying for one more year? And I asked Joe Schwanta to be the head of the department. He said, Sam, if you give me the head of the department, I'm going to leave too. I said, okay, I'll take it for the year. So I stayed for an extra year and retired in 95. And that year, I had a fellowship, the Karl Huser Fellowship at Ithaca College, and went there once a week, every month. And the next year, 1965, no, this was 65, was Karl Husser. 66, I had a fellowship, the same thing, residency at the University of Utah. And there, I went there also once a week on during the whole year, every month.
So you
Yeah,
flew
Brabanel. It
you
was a
flew from
Brabanel.
Rochester down. You flew from
Right.
Rochester down to Utah.
Yeah, for a week. That was okay.
Yeah.
It was called the Abravanel chair.
Yeah.
So in 1967, I moved to Toledo, or actually we lived in Bowling Green because my wife Emily
Was this
was
1997, Sam?
97.
97, yeah.
97, I moved from Rochester to Toledo, or Bowling Green, where my wife is still the conductor of the orchestra and the opera and teaching conducting. She's the head of the instrumental conducting department. Well, in January of that year, after not teaching for 4 months, I got a call from John Corigliano. John Corigliano had been a friend for a long time, and he said, Sam, I hate to say this, but David Diamond, thank God, is retiring. He's been teaching at Juilliard, and there always was a battle with him. Would you come here and teach? So I said, well, I'm living in Ohio. He said, we pay for everything and so on and so forth. He made it sound very, very good and very convenient. So I said, well, I'll think about it. The next day, Joe Polisi, who was the head of the school, called me and said, Sam, have you thought about it? I had a day. So I said, yes, I thought about it, and I'm happy to do it. So that is the reason I went to Juilliard.
I think that was around the time that Gloria Day Cantoras and Elizabeth Patterson, and we were starting to make connections with you when you were transitioning.
I'm going to start the next lecture with my connection with you and Gloria Day, because it's been a wonderful relationship.
Yeah.
And the whole Eastman experience was just great. And I was able to write a great deal of music. I had to leave out a lot of things from the Eastman experience, but some of the things we'll look back on the next time.
And we can get the book, Building Bridges with Music, Stories from a Composer's Life, because it's fabulous. Sam, I love it that your enthusiasm for music, I love it that you're still so confirming with so many people at age 96, and just appreciate this time that we could be together.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
Bye-bye.